telling me that each pod gathers a terabyte worth of data on, is it each trip? Is that?
Yeah, the amount of data that would be coming off.
Yeah.
We don't know the specific number, but the amount of data coming off of the system on each trip will be on that order, given how fast, how often you need to constantly measure where the pod is.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about, headways that are, the distance between pods is like, could be a kilometer, but it's only 30 seconds, so you need to know exactly where the pod is.
Yeah.
And how far and have them talking to the next pod, talking to the ground, sensing the distance, so the vibration, the heat inside, the temperature, the ambient temperature for the people, the air pressure, everything is constantly being measured and fed back to a system. And we haven't built that system yet.
Right.
It doesn't exist. We asked all the trained people, they don't know how to build it. And we have to turn to probably the aerospace industry, and they don't know.
What about the system that's
in
the Teslas? Because there's that's connected and it uses that information to become smarter and.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay, now, there are some people that are worried about holding their phone next to their face because of radiation. So. You have electromagnetic.
Yeah, we'll give everyone tinfoil hats on their way in with your ticket. No, I've asked that question of our electrical engineers, and they said that the amount of magnetic radiation coming out of the motor area is not that bad, and there'll be shielding on the floor of the pod.
What kind of shielding?
Like good shielding, like Americonium. I don't know. Unobtainium. I do not know.
Okay. Getting back to the costs. So it's going to cost, what did you say, $20 million to $30 million
per mile.
Per mile. Yeah. But it's not going to use a ton of energy. When is this going to pay for itself, and how much is it going to cost me to get on Hyperloop?
It's good questions. So the only route that we've studied in that kind of detail to know the price of the ticket or exactly the whole system cost is this route from Helsinki to Stockholm. And if you think of that geography, there's wait a minute, that would mean going under the North Sea. And yeah, this would be the longest undersea tunnel ever built. But even if you just do the mainland parts, so Helsinki to Turku and Stockholm to the airport, and I think up to I forget the city, it would be $27. And each of those would be about $9 billion. So we're already in, and I get that people freak out about the numbers, but we're in this realm of transportation where everything is billions of dollars. A new runway in Atlanta, they're already talking about $1 billion, and Heathrow's talking about $1 billion.
For a runway?
For a runway.
Why?
Just it costs a lot of money to make a runway. They're miles long, and they have to be perfectly flat. It's a lot of concrete. I don't know, but a lot of engineering. Bridges are billions of dollars. These things cost a lot of money. So we're just saying, put us in the conversation. Oh, you want to build a high-speed rail network for $30 billion? Why don't you build a Hyperloop for 18, and it goes 3 times faster? And doesn't make as much noise, doesn't take as much of the land, and there's no emissions.
And why is it only going to cost $27?
The trip?
Yeah.
Well, it could be free even if you're a pensioner or something like that. So the guys I talked to in Australia, who are our representatives down there, think that we could do, because it's leaving so often and it's our infrastructure, we can do dynamic pricing. So if you walk up last minute, it could be the same price as an airfare. But if you book 2 weeks in advance or you're over 65, it's free, or it could be $3.
So you're aiming to price competitively with trains, not with airplanes.
It's like a bus ticket. That would be the idea. Oh, your first question is, will it pay for itself?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one, again, this study that we did in the Nordics would pay for itself in 15 years.
With the revenue that was generated from the ticket sales.
Plus the wider economic benefits. So when governments buy these things, they also look at the amount of time saved by the society, and then they look at other kinds of more esoteric figures like agglomeration, job mobility, uplift in productivity by having people who live here be able to work there, and also the economic value uplift of the real estate around the stations.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
that's how the Hong Kong metro works. Because they own all the land, they decide where they're going to build a new station for the subway, and they give that license to a developer.
Yeah.
And like the city gets to keep, the country gets to keep a piece of it. It's called land value capture, and we hope to do a lot of that as well.
Okay, I'm just processing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's precedent here. Like there's the Orison Tunnel. Have you ever seen a picture of this gigantic bridge that then disappears into the sea? It goes between Malmo and Copenhagen.
You would have seen it in.
Yeah, so that was a big deal, and people were pushing against it, and the government said we should do this, we should do this, and it was like the Danes didn't like it because they thought the Swedes would come in. The Swedes didn't like it because, and it got done, and it got built, and it's beautiful, and it works really well. It does rail and road, and it's paid for itself in 10 years. At first, like no one was taking it, but then people started to understand what it means, and now it's very well used. Same thing with the Cross Harbor Tunnel in Hong Kong. If you give someone an opportunity to move between two places that they're already going at a tenth of the time, they'll use it a lot.
Yeah.
And it will create a market. People who weren't making that trip will start making that trip.
Yeah. So you and I were talking about the possibility of Hyperloop between Waterloo in Ontario and Toronto, and why the Canadian government, the Ontario government, or the Canadian government?
Okay, so Canada's a very good infrastructure government. They love investing in infrastructure.
Thank you
unlike
for giving.
The Americans.
For those of you who don't know, I'm Canadian, so that's why I always have to wrap a Canadian thing into everything. But why the Ontario government is interested in a Hyperloop between Waterloo and Toronto?
So, so Waterloo, was a major telecom center. BlackBerry was based there, and they went out of business. Well, they're not out of business, but they had a lot of layoffs. So you've got all these talented engineers in Waterloo looking for work, and Toronto has lots of great startups and banks and things that hiring engineers. So if you can create infrastructure that connects two places in not an instant, but in a dramatically reduced amount of time, you can rebalance regional economies. That's kind of the play between Helsinki and Stockholm. In Finland, Nokia was torpedoed, and Microsoft laid off a bunch of people in Salo. There was their software development center. So you've got about 4,000 engineers who are out of work, and they would love to be able to get to Stockholm in 15 minutes to work at some of the startups in Sweden or Helsinki. So you see that same kind of thing in Russia, Moscow to New Moscow or Skolkovo, some of these tech hubs that the government's building, 50, 60 miles outside of town. If you live in Moscow, you can commute there, or better yet, avoid the entire Moscow commute because it's awful to get through traffic in Moscow, and live out in Skolkovo and Hyperloop into town.
So your vision is a way to extend cities essentially without piling more people in them to live.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a big believer in density, that people should live in cities, and I'm against sprawl, but the tendency of humans is to go where they can get the most amount of space for the least amount of money, as long as they're within a reasonable shot of an urban center where they either work or enjoy the social capital, the social benefits. There's this thing, Marchetti's constant. Do you know this? Which looked at some economist. He looked at human travel and going back to like Neolithic times. People have always lived 30 minutes from where they work, where they hunt or where they work. And no matter what the technology they used, it could be trains, trucks, cars, drays, like horse buggies. It's always 30 minutes. So all that means is that the faster our technologies are, the further away people live. So why not live in the exurbs? Why not live? I don't know what that would mean out here, like
Tracy,
Gilroy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But you could live in Gilroy. But in New York, it could mean living in Dutchess County and coming down the Hudson. Living in those cool towns like Hudson or Ghent or something, having a farmhouse, but being able to get to the Metropolitan Opera by 7:30 without worrying about it. I think, or the opposite,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's something to think about, because I know you and I talked about this a little bit earlier this week, but what could change in our lives if, you know, you guys are, many of you come from San Francisco to this, like how would your life be different if you could get much further distances, travel much further distances much more quickly? How would our lives change? It's not a question that I'm asking you to answer right now, but just worth thinking about and talking about, because I think it's a really fascinating idea. It opens possibilities that we probably haven't thought about heretofore.
For, well, not just for human travel, but for logistics and even the bigger industry of supply chains. You can have smaller warehouses, you wouldn't need as many because you can always get it. It's similar the way all the stuff on your desk has now disappeared into the phone. You know, your calendar, your camera, your Rolodex. We can have like all that stuff, the built environment, the stuff you see around SFO and O'Hare, and all that stuff can just shrink and maybe turn into parks or something. Or even our ports, you know, you can move ports off the coast, which is a crazy idea, but we're talking about doing underwater tubes and floating cargo, you know, retrieval systems where ships come in the container, and then you can just return all that beautiful beachfront property, you know, in Oakland or in Long Beach. So it's
funny.
a quality of life that you know people take for granted. They take for granted a low quality life right now, and we can maybe reuse some land.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna just
build green developments way outside of town that are fresh and smart and low water and low light, you know, everything, and still get to work at Salesforce downtown.
I'm gonna leave Hyperloop for 1 second, and also we forgot to say that even though it's fast, hyper, it's not a loop. So it's a bit of a misnomer.
Well, it could be a loop, like, depending on how you build the station.
Yeah, okay.
It could loop back around and come the other way.
In the station.
In the station.
It loops in the station.
Yeah, and we also have these loops, like some of our route networks have these branches that go off, like so there'll be a main trunk line if you choose to go direct, but if you're going to an intermediate stop, you loop off, decelerate, get off, and then the pod accelerates back on.
Okay. But given your background at Forbes and the years and years and years you spent writing about technology and the time that you spent out here, do you care to comment about that in terms of what you've seen over the past 20 years? What's changed? What's remained the same? Can you give us, I know that's a big question, but just initial impressions, overview, thoughts?
About the Valley, or about how the press covers the Valley?
Anything. Just anything that comes to mind. I mean, you picked a good time to leave journalism because you know that brought, like, print is going away and has gone away. Yeah,
I didn't want to be part of it anymore, which sounds bad, but it sounds like a defeat. But you know, the first quarter of this year, so I left in May. And when I saw that Google and Facebook took 75% of the digital ad revenue in the industry, in like all of media, I was like, that's not good. That can't be good. Because that means 25% is left over for the New York Times, Washington Post, Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal. That's crumbs. That's meager. And that's not enough to sustain a healthy alternative. And you know, Facebook has so much control over what people read, and those things were getting down on me, and the way advertising is sold. It just started, after a while, I start to, you know, isn't there something else? But that's just me. I mean, there's plenty of people who are going into the business who are jazzed, who love to cover things, love to tell stories. But I came out the other side. And I, you know, as a reporter, you tend to fall in love with your subjects, and then you move on to the next one. But this one, because I did a cover story on Hyperloop about a year and a half ago, I didn't stop thinking about it. Because there's few things that are this big that come along every now and then. Like there's few doors that you feel like you need to walk through. And this was one of them. You know, I think Google was like that. I'm not saying we're going to be like a $400, $800 billion company, but I felt like this touched so many different areas that I'm interested in, both technology and politics and regulation and the way people live and work and move. it was just, I couldn't pass it up. So I demanded the job. I said, you got to hire me. And they're like, okay. And now they're like, why did I hire this guy?
No. And so in terms of the 20 years that you've been covering the Bay Area, what do you have any thoughts on that? How have things changed? And
I don't think they're changing at all. I think they're all the same. Everything's the same. So it's seriously, it's like just like cycles repeat themselves. I mean, like AT&T is buying Time Warner for $80 billion. That's just like Time Warner buying AOL. Like everything, nothing's changed. Still a lot of the same faces. You know, we miss Steve Jobs, but a lot of the same people are still around. You know, there's a vicious pecking order, and a lot of the journalists they do a lot of times they do play the access game. You know, it's very competitive. Like now that I'm on the other side and see what people write about us, I realize, my God, like half this stuff is wrong.
You're just
How could they have gotten it so wrong? Like what did we say that got you confused? I think people were just working too fast. And then like half the time people will write about us and they won't even call.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always told reporters you have to call, pick up the phone. So that was tough to see.
Yeah, and that's probably a big change too. I'm sure the pace of, obviously we all know the pace of everything is really
But the important thing is for companies to own their own story. So like one of the reasons that I'm there is so to tell our story ahead of the press.
Right.
So that they can see what we're saying, and it's kind of like has some authority to it and hopefully some authenticity. It's not a sell job. I'm covering us like I would on the outside, maybe a little bit more of a little more promotional, but I'm trying to provide an alternate thing for them to read, so maybe they get a press release and they talk to an executive, but they can also read this really, you know, lengthy explanation about what's going on.
Okay.
And Tesla does that very well too. If you read their blog, they're very confrontational, but it's very detailed and in depth, and it's written almost for their customers to reassure their customers about their safety issues, their new technologies. Because their customers it's like this community that they've built, and they feel like they need to hear from us. So we're building the same kind of community of, you know, regulators who support us and legislatures who underwrite us and people who ride it, which is years from now. But we're building that same movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.